President of Youth Parliament Society, would like to welcome you all to the second edition of the National Webinar on Career Awareness in Legal Globe, organized by Youth Parliament Society, Law College Dehradun, Faculty of Uttaranchal University. I would like to welcome honorable guest speaker for today, Ms. Vinita Krishnan ma'am, Director, Direct Tax at Khaitan and Company, and Ms. Krutika Chitre ma'am, Senior Associate at Khaitan and Company. Honorable Dean, Law College Dehradun, and officiating Vice Chancellor, Uttaranchal University, Professor Dr. Rajesh Bahuguna sir, Honorable Principal, Law College Dehradun, Professor Dr. Poonam Rawat ma'am, Honorable Chairperson, Youth Parliament Society, Law College Dehradun, Dr. Rajat Sama sir. I would like to acknowledge the presence of Mr. Iqbal Singh Sani, Senior Manager, Corporate Resource Center, and Mr. Vibhum Agarwal sir, Corporate Resource Center Manager. I would also like to acknowledge the President and members of Youth Parliament and welcome all the fellow attendees. Before starting with today's session, I would like to give a brief introduction of Ms. Vinita Krishnan ma'am and Ms. Krutika Chitra ma'am. Vinita Krishnan ma'am is a director in the direct tax practice in Mumbai office. Prior to joining Khaitan and Company, she worked with Ernst & Young India Private Limited. She has over 13 years of rich and varied experience in advising clients on domestic and international matters. Her expertise covers a broad spectrum of tax matters, which includes domestic and cross-border tax advisory, international tax, globalization, structuring of inbound, outbound investments, transactional tax, taxation of EPC contracts, M&A structuring of cross-border secondments, and tax due diligence. She has advised notable multinational corporations, Indian and international, on their India entry and exit strategies. She is also the associate member of the Indian Institute of Chartered Accountants of India and member of the Bombay Chartered Accountants Society. Now, regarding Ms. Krutika Chitra ma'am, she is a senior associate with a demonstrated history of working with reputed law firms. Ma'am is skilled in legal research and drafting, advising on tax insurance policies, advising on matters in the private client practice space, including trusts, wills, prenuptial agreements, general succession planning, and international taxation. Ma'am has completed her LLB program from Government Law College, Mumbai. She is also having strong professional qualification with a solicitor's degree from the Bombay Incorporated Law Society and company secretary qualification from the Institute of Company Secretaries of India. Now, I humbly request Dean, Law College Dehradun and officiating Vice Chancellor, Uttaranchal University, Professor Dr. Rajesh Bahuguna sir, to kindly address the gathering.
Thank you, Somi Sharma. On the occasion of this national webinar organized by Youth Parliament Society of Law College Dehradun, Faculty of Uttaranchal University, today present keynote speaker Ms. Vinita Krishnan, Director, Direct Tax at Khaitan and Company. Another keynote speaker, Ms. Krutika Chitre, Senior Associate at Khaitan and Company. Principal of Law College Dehradun, Professor Poonam Rawat, Chairperson of Youth Parliament Society, Mr. Dr. Rajesh Sharma, Head of the CRC of Uttaranchal University, Mr. Iqbal Singh, Manager of Placement Cell, Mr. Vibhum Agarwal, all the firstly President, Mr. Sahil Thakur of YPS, Vice President Somi Sharma, and all the office bearer of Youth Parliament Society. I take this privilege to welcome you all on the behalf of entire Uttaranchal University family. You all are welcome here in this webinar. Ladies and gentlemen, Youth Parliament Society has visualized about this webinar in which they have invited 5 speakers to speak one after another. And the main theme of the webinar is legal analysis of various financial products offered by banks and financial institutions and their application in commercial transactions. Before this, in our last talk, we have discussed a lot about the financial transactions and particularly related to SARFAESI, IQB code also. And now the tax laws and tax laws as a career. When we have selected this topic, we had in our mind two things. Firstly, to give knowledge to our students and participants from this university and all other universities about the financial instruments and financial acts and all. But at the same time, which is more important, that there are series of options open for the law graduates. And one of the option is to practice either in court of law or with the law firms. There also, traditionally, if you ask at a first instance to a student, he say, I'll be practicing in criminal side, sometimes civil side, this and that. But what I understand, this tax law and this area is one of the area where you can practice without troubling much yourself to stand in court and this and that and all this. Your intellectual mind can be more used in dignified manners, even much of the practice in the chamber. So this is one of the area. So those who are willing to opt tax law as a career, I think today's lecture will be best for them because we have today with us a young girl sitting before me, both with 13 years of experience in this field and presently directing a department of the top-notch law firms of the country. So, with this once again, I welcome you, Vinita, as well as Ms. Krutika, on the behalf of Uttaranchal University. Right? Not taking much of the time, but as we were discussing before starting, that normally we are organizing such type of webinars in the form of seminar and workshop physically in Dehradun. So I invite you in advance, as and when time permits, as and when the situations are normal. This is your college, this is your university, and hereafter you consider part of this college and I will consider extension of my family. With this, I'm not taking much of the time. Thank you. Thank you so much. And over to Somi Sarma.
Thank you, sir, for such generous warm welcome. Before proceeding with the session, I would request all the participants that during the session, if you have any questions, you can write them to the chat. And at the end of the session, we will have short question and answer session. Now, I request our guest speakers to move forward with the session on the topic tax law as a career. Over to you, ma'am.
Thank you, Somi, and thank you, sir, for the very generous introduction and warm welcome. Thank you once again for giving us this opportunity to be able to address the students in these times. And as Vinita said, we commend the absolutely amazing initiative that the college and the youth parliament has taken to bring together everyone in these times on a very timely topic as well. Before we move into the depths of the webinar, I will just take this opportunity to give a little background on Khaitan and Company, the law firm that Vinita and I come from. Khaitan and Company was founded in 1911 and is one of the oldest and largest law firms in India. Khaitan takes great pride in being a full-service law firm. And what I mean by a full-service law firm is that we do not only offer services within some of the common fields such as corporate and litigation, but we provide the full spectrum of legal services to our clients. So some of our practice areas, for example, would include tax, real estate, banking and finance, energy and infrastructure, the capital markets, IPR laws, just to name a few. We have a strength of 600 plus lawyers over 4 locations in the country, with our oldest office in Calcutta, then New Delhi, Bangalore, and the largest one in Mumbai. Vinita and I are from the tax team in the Mumbai office, and today we will be taking you through tax law as a career. Before we begin the webinar, and in light of the larger theme of the webinar, we thought of dividing this webinar largely into 3 aspects. Firstly, where we would like to discuss law as a career with a specific emphasis on tax law. Secondly, we would like to take you through a few fundamentals of tax law. While tax law is a niche area, very technical as well, we thought it would give you an advantage to have knowledge of the basics on which tax law is based. In the event tax comes up as a subject during your curriculum, or if you decide to take up a tax internship, it always helps to have a very basic understanding, at least, of the very important concepts in tax law. And thirdly, we thought we'll just take you through a few examples of how tax law emanates itself in all of our present day lives without us really noticing or paying attention. And then, of course, we'll be open to any questions that any of the participants may have on tax law as a career. So to begin with law as a career, Vinita and I will largely be discussing our personal experiences as tax professionals. While I am a lawyer, Vinita is a chartered accountant, and she will have a very distinct, unique perspective as well to share. Well, to start with me, I do not come from a family of lawyers. I did not dream or aspire to be a lawyer as a kid or ever. My decision to enter law was really the result of a career counselor telling me it's the right decision to make based on a flurry of skill tests, aptitude tests, and interest tests. So what I'm basically telling you here is it's okay if you don't have a full-fledged plan or a plan at all. It's never too late to catch up or to start making your career in a field in which you have an interest and want to build an aptitude. Well, for most of you, this is beyond you. You're all part of a great university and a great faculty of law, and well on your way to becoming lawyers. Sorry. But having said that, getting into a college of repute or a college of your choice is literally only the first step in your career as a lawyer. You will realize, and a lot of us have realized, that there is a huge leap that you make when you graduate from law school and enter into the professional services where you are actually practicing as a lawyer. And the most productive way to spend your 3 years or your 5 years in law school is to prepare to make this leap as small as possible. There are a few ways to prepare for this, and this is something that you practice in everyday life, but just focusing on these aspects and realizing how they translate into your professional career will go a long way in reducing these leaps. I'll just name a few very obvious basic ones. Firstly, emails. I'm sure all of us as students as well are sending emails, whether it is to invite people for webinars such as these, or to invite them to other competitions, or to even send your assignments for that matter. Please pay very close attention to how you send these emails, the formality in the emails, the tone, language, words that you use in all of these emails. It will go a long way when you are working as an intern or as an associate, or just join the law firm or start your own practice. It is your first impression on your client or your senior. And hence it's very important in how you draft these. Secondly, your drafting skills in general. All of us today are drafting various assignments, are drafting memorandums, or are drafting answer sheets. Pay very, very close attention to how you draft these. It's one thing to be able to do your research or to read up and to study. It's another to be able to articulate everything that you have found. If you're a good researcher or you're a good student who understands the academics and the letter of law, it's only half your job done if you do not put all of your findings well into an email or a document or whatever required form. So please pay very close attention to how you draft your documents, how you draft your letters, your assignments, all of that. And when I say drafting, I do not mean the use of superfluous language. I, in fact, mean the exact opposite. Use as simple, clear, concise language as you can. Get your message through to the person who's reading it. Learn how to alter your document or your email, whatever you're sending out, as per the audience you're sending it to. And thirdly, the way you speak and present yourself. We will discuss going ahead how law, and not just tax law, is pretty much for everyone, and it has very different avenues. So even if you're not looking at being a litigator, it's very important that you develop the confidence of speaking to people, speaking in front of people, and develop a manner of speaking that is pleasant, respectable, and affirmative all at the same time. So these are three things that you can focus on as students today in a law college, but no matter which year of law school you're in, the earlier the better, the more time you have to start and prepare for all of these. The third thing that I would say is, as students of law, you would be doing yourself a great disservice if you do not explore and venture out into the various areas of law that are available. Bahuguna sir was very on point when he mentioned that as law students, where we are aware of maybe one or two practice areas of law, and we settle our mind on those practice areas and say, okay, maybe I'm going to be a corporate lawyer, I'm going to be a litigation lawyer, but we do not think beyond that. The reason for that is inherently a lot of unawareness that we have as law students. And today we have several avenues to put light on the various opportunities that you have available. I mentioned 6 or 7 practice areas that Ketan does, and I'm sure I missed out on a few. So there are very varied array of opportunities available to each one of you for a skill set or an interest that each one of you may differently have. So please explore these. How do you go about exploring these? The internet, of course, is your best friend. There is a lot of information available on the internet today on the various practice areas of law within India and internationally. So please read up about these. Please participate in competitions that your law college or various other law colleges organize, whether it's a moot or a debate or whatever else. Please participate. It's okay if you can't participate as a speaker, do it as a researcher. It's okay if you don't win any accolades. What is important is an exposure to a different kind of law, something that is outside your interest, or something that's outside your comfort area, something that's probably even outside your curriculum. It's the best way to get any exposure in these times. Your curriculum, of course, I'm sure is drafted as widely as possible to encompass as many laws as possible. And the last and most important way would be internships. Please intern every chance you get. I understand we have only a limited number of breaks or a limited number of internship opportunities. So please choose your internships very carefully. Make sure you do a little variety here and there to at least eliminate areas that you will know you don't have to venture into and you don't keep making the wrong choice with. And then venture into areas that have caught your interest, maybe because of an article you read, or maybe because of a moot you did, or a subject that you studied. This is the best way for you to know how the knowledge that you have earned in college while studying law is practically applied in situations. So please intern as much as you can. And with the entire COVID-19 situation, a lot of law firms are offering virtual internships. There are several webinars that are being set up by legal luminaries on various topics. Please try and attend these. It's okay if you don't understand anything or you don't understand everything, but whatever little knowledge you will gain from these will never go to waste. So this was one. Coming specifically to tax law, I think there are a few myths that I would like to bust. I think when you say tax, the first reaction that you get from a lot of people is a little sense of panic, saying, "Oh no, that's too difficult, or it's too technical, or it's too many numbers, or it's too much maths, or it's too much calculation." And let me tell you, all of these are pure myths. When you are working as a tax advisor, as a tax lawyer, your primary function is to advise clients on the law of tax. It's, of course, extremely helpful if you are comfortable with numbers or are good with handling numbers and complex Excel sheets, but it's not a requirement. Ketan's tax team, for example, is a beautiful example of this, where we have a very good blend of lawyers, or pure lawyers, with no commerce, number, finance backgrounds. And we have a number of chartered accountants in our team who are very strong on the financial aspects of it. So there is a role for every kind of professional in a tax team, whether it's a lawyer or a chartered accountant. So do not detest yourself from taking up a career in tax because you do not have a commerce background. It's honestly okay not to. Well, if I have to tell you about a usual day in a tax lawyer's life, let me tell you, no 2 days will be the same. Tax law is extremely challenging and will throw up something new every other day. What we would look for in a tax professional is for someone who likes doing research, who is good at their research, who has an aptitude to have an inquisitive mind to look at solving problems, and is able to articulate the effects and answers of his research as well as possible. So this was being a tax lawyer from my end. I will now hand over to Vinita to discuss her experience as a tax professional.
Thank you, Krutika. So I think she has said very candidly, and even when we look as leaders, when we look to hire someone and also give internship opportunities, the first thing we look at is the analytical skills. Because in tax law that matters a lot. There are a lot of interpretations where if you enjoy research, it's a good subject to be. And not only, as Krutika said, after doing the research, how do you translate that to your seniors also matters a lot. Because at the end of the day, we also need to know what the case law is saying about and not just finding the case law. The second skill set is, as Krutika had mentioned, drafting is very important, because if you see most of the litigations, even in tax, we have seen many times it is because the documentation did not say what they wanted to say. That's one of the ground whereby many judges have looked at it, the transaction very differently. So we emphasis a lot on the drafting skills of a person, and it's okay. You may not be best drafter, but as you put in words, some things come to someone very naturally. So we encourage people to write more articles, thought leadership, research papers, whereby there is always a place whereby you can improve your drafting. But that is something, if you have an advantage, it's a very good place to be in. The third skill set is what we see in the tax lawyer is also a team play, because as Krutika mentioned, at times you will need to work along with, in our firm, while we have a full-fledged tax practice, many times we work very cohesively with other teams. Like Sir had mentioned, there was the Banking SARFAESI Act team members who had given those webinars. So even in Ketan, we have such teams. Now, when they are leading a transaction, we work with them to see what we can give them feedback on tax perspective. So you need to be a very good team player, and an attitude of the person also is something which we look at it. It's a very soft skill, but that matters a lot. How you conduct yourself and how much the fire in your belly is there, like how enthusiastic you are, whether you really like it or is it a forced thing. It really comes out the way you do the internship, whether you do the work. because that will take you and help you to differentiate as compared to any other person. While there is no direct formula, all it means just put in the right efforts and you need to be enthusiastic about it. And my experience as a law tax person, I would say that while I am a chartered accountant, I started my career in Ernst and Young, which is one of the big fours where you have like army or battalion of chartered accountants. So when I came in Ketan, you see the size of the team is very small as compared to a big four. You know, the first thing it comes to your mind, okay, I have joined again Ketan, it's almost a decade. So I joined as an associate and I've grown. So I've seen my team grow, my firm grow. So that gives me a very different perspective of how things have looked, have been over the last decade and my career phase. So one of the things which is a very differentiating point in Big Fours, you have a lot of baskets in terms of one would be doing M&A tax, one would be doing a pharma tax, one would be doing an infrastructure tax. But when you work in a law firm's tax team, the same team is required to depict knowledge and give comfort to the clients that any other field of law, whichever is in whichever industry, as a challenge we do as part of tax practice, which again is something which is very good, interesting thing for law students. And someone who's very tech savvy and who's also good with law, given the increased use of AI, and you see there is a lot of automated kind of systems being coming in. There are good consulting firms which are investing in those softwares. There is also a huge demand for people with a law background and who has some tech knowledge to work along with them. While that is not, while as a part of law firm, we would be doing that as a backend. If our firm wants to set up a tax database, Krutika would be spearheading that, and someone who has a tech knowledge. So this is another thing which as a student you can look at it. So all in all the formulas are simple. Be honest, put in good efforts and focus on improving yourself and don't stop. Just and you need to do internship, practical internship, because that is something which I would say in CS we had an advantage, because as a chartered accountant, by default tax comes easy to you, and we also have an internship of almost around 3 years where we practice under one particular person. So for you, since there is no such limitation, it's even more open ground that you can actually explore and see whether it really suits you. Because even in tax team, I would say, there have been cases where we really liked an intern, and there has been also a case, of course, it is on a case-to-case basis. There is a PPO which has been given to them. So you should always go, and when you do an internship, also do it with full rigor and enthusiasm. That makes a difference if you really like the subject. Any questions? Otherwise, we can move on to the basics of the tax law.
No, ma'am, we don't have any questions right now. We'll
Sure.
have the question
Thank
and
you.
question.
Got it. Thank you. Krutika, can you move on to the next slide? Yeah. Next slide. So, few basic things of income tax is a tax which is applicable for a particular financial year. When I say financial year, it means 1st April to 31st March. So now you are in June 2020. So the financial year is 1st April 2020 and which will end on 31st March 2021. So every company or every person who is a taxable person, they have to compute income for one particular financial year, and each year is treated separately. And interestingly, in each year, we all await when the budget is announced by the Honorable Finance Minister, what would be the key takeaways in the tax provisions. So this law is a law which gets amended depending on, not all the provisions get amended, but there are changes which are announced as part of the union budget, which normally happens by Feb or Jan of the initial period. And then that bill gets gets passed and then it gets enacted into the act. So as a process for any tax lawyer, when I'm looking at a particular provision, it is always important for me to see which year I'm talking about and also what was the applicable law then. Because if you just open an income tax act and start reading and you feel same should be there even in the past years, it may not be. Income tax is a subject which changes almost every year. You would need to look for amendments. The next basic thing which is to see is how do you know what I should pay tax? One of the main thing depends on what is your residential status. Now, the definition of residential status for income tax varies depending on the category of taxpayer. For people, you and me who are individuals, it is dependent on a physical presence. If you are present in India for a certain number of days, which is given in the law, then you become a resident. Otherwise, you become a non-resident. So again, it's very important for you to know how many days I'm spending so that I become resident or non-resident. For corporates, for Indian companies who are incorporated under Companies Act, it is fairly simple. They are always regarded as residents of India. For foreign company, say Microsoft US or Facebook, you may feel, oh, they are US entities. Surely they are non-residents. Don't assume. Because the way Income Tax Act says, even though you are a foreign company, you can become an Indian resident if your decision making happens from India. So again, for any foreign company, where is your decision making, whereby can you be regarded as a resident of India, plays a crucial role as a basic test. For non-corporates like partnership, LLPs, it is driven by where your control management is situated. Even if part is in India, you are regarded as a tax resident of India. Krutika, next slide, please. So when we look at the next slide, why do I insist to see what is the residential status? Because the logic is the Indian Income Tax Act looks at taxation from two angles. One, if you're a resident, it is a residential-based taxation. And if you're a non-resident, it is only a source-based taxation. What does it mean in simple terms? Say, I am Vinita, I am a resident in India. I have income from Dubai. I sold something in Dubai. And so whether I need to pay tax, even though the profits are actually coming from Dubai and not particularly in India, it is not in Indian territory. The answer is yes, because I am taxed on a global income. Whereas for a non-resident, it is only India sourced. In my same example, if I had become a non-resident of India, then whatever I earn in Dubai should not be taxed in India because it is happening outside India. For non-residents, what is Indian source is a very tricky subject, while the income tax law lays down certain criteria depending on which stream of income the non-resident is deriving, whether the source is said to be in India. To give you an example, I'm not sure if you have heard about the famous Vodafone case, which went up to Supreme Court. Now, what was the case about? There is Vodafone Netherlands, which is purely a foreign entity. And you have Hutch entity, which sold its stake in Vodafone India, the Vodafone cellular entity. The entity which sold the shares was of a foreign entity, which in turn held the Vodafone India. So you had Hutch, foreign entity, selling the shares of a Cayman entity to Vodafone Netherlands. Now, where is the India source here? The seller is outside, the buyer is outside, the shares of the company which are sold is also outside India. So, does it mean there is no source in India? Even for those things, there was a case law which went up to Supreme Court. So you can imagine how tricky is the source rule for a non-resident. Now, that is a change just to complete the loop. This is called as the Vodafone tax, and which is one of the very important provision of the Indian tax law. And this section, even though the Supreme Court ruled in favor of the assessee that there is no tax to be paid because everything is happening outside India, the law was amended retrospectively to say that it was always the intention of the law to tax such transfers. So the bottom line is, what is sourced, you would need to see on case-to-case basis. Now, once we know the broad picture, the Income Tax Act tries to put those income in 5 baskets. The first basket is a salary income, which is fairly straightforward. What is salary income? You need to have an employer-employee relationship. Now, when I have an employer-employee relationship, it's the income which I take is called as a salary income. And normally, salaried class are the highest taxpayers. Now, why that statement comes is normally they don't get any deduction as you get in a business class. The second heading is income from house property. So today, say Krutika and Vinita have residential units, commercial unit, we give it on rent. The income which we get would be taxed as under the head of income from house property. So I would need to see the provisions of income from house property to see whether am I going to pay tax or not. And at the same way, there is an entity which owns a shopping mall, and the shopping mall can also be regarded as a house property. You may feel shopping mall is nothing but I'm in the business of making a shopping mall and people coming there, walking in, buying stuff, enjoying the entertainment. Even in those cases, at times it can be treated as income from house property. So the characterization of what income and transaction you're looking at is very vital to see under which head am I going to fall. The third basket is profit and gains, which is like the business income. Whether you are an individual earning a professional business income, or you are a corporate which earns from sale of goods which are manufactured in India, or you are purely a service sector. In all these cases, if you want to compute, it will be taxed as business income, and you would need to follow the provisions of profit and gains chapter of the Income Tax Act. And the third important thing, or the fourth important thing, is the capital gains. Now, there are certain assets like shares, for example, you hold it and you invest today in the IPO, say Reliance, everyone knows the deals which are being talked in newspapers, where all the big shots are coming and investing even in COVID times. And there was a rights issue which was made by the company. You invested in the shares of the company, and you feel it's a good, after 1 year, 2 years down the line, you feel it's a good time to divest and you exit. Those kind of transactions which are not in your normal course and where you are selling a capital asset, which again, what is a capital asset is defined in Income Tax Act, are taxed under the head of capital gains. The Vodafone case which I mentioned also comes in the basket of capital gains. And the last basket is, I don't know where I should fall in, so I fall in the residuary head, which is income from other sources. Income from other sources, to give you a very simple example, can be like a dividend income. It's clearly not a salary. It's clearly not income from house property. It may be business income depending on whether I am in the business of investing shares, but it can be income from other sources. And Indian law also has gift provisions which gets taxed in income from other sources. So again, when you look at the Income Tax Act, you would need to see whether there are residency provisions, whether there are heads, what are the heads of income which I would end up paying tax. It needs to be identified. Next slide, please. As you see in the next slide, then the income tax is divided into various provisions such as charging provision and machinery provisions. The heads of income which I spoke would fall under the charging provisions. Then there are certain other charging provisions, and also there are provisions whereby they say nothing will be taxed and it is completely exempt. Those are also, there are specific provisions in the Income Tax Act. And machinery provisions, to put it simply, are something which helps to make the charging provisions effective. So to say that it assistance in recovery of tax, while the charging provision says you need to pay tax. What happens if you don't pay tax? There is a machinery provision which says on how to collect the tax, how to pay the tax in case they don't do it, how do we ensure we recover the tax. Those things comes under the machinery provisions. Also important thing is India has a comprehensive withholding tax provision, which essentially is a machinery provision. For example, today, Krutika and me, when we get our fees from Ketan and company, they would be deducting TDS. Say if I have to get 100 rupees, they may give me only 90 in my hand and they will deposit 10 rupees to the kitty of the government. Now this 10 rupees is called as TDS. India has a comprehensive withholding tax provision whereby say if Ketan fails to withhold this 10 rupees, tomorrow the tax officer can go behind Ketan, get back this 10 rupees. Of course, there are some exceptions, certain conditions, but hence, as a payer of any payment, you need to first check. Even it could be as simple as you people, students, when you come and you take houses on rent, you may be paying rental fees to the landlord. Even in that, whether you need to withhold tax or not is something in a day-to-day thing you need to keep in mind. And even for non-residents, like again to bring back the Vodafone case, even in case of non-resident, if the payer itself is a non-resident, still there can be withholding tax provisions which are made applicable. So for the Vodafone case, Vodafone was not the seller who had to pay tax. Seller was Hutch entity, but Vodafone was only the buyer. It was the payer which paid money to Hutch. But still, Vodafone had to fight tooth and nail up to Supreme Court to say, because the court said, the authorities tried to allege that you failed to withhold tax, therefore we should recover the withholding tax from you, and we don't care whether Hutch paid tax or not. So bottom line, withholding tax provision is another chapter which is very important part of the Income Tax Act. Then lastly, in cross-border transactions, there are two things which as a student you should focus on, apart from the residency thing which I mentioned. The first thing is India has a comprehensive transfer pricing provisions. So whether the person with whom am I dealing in a cross-border, is he my related party? Now just related party you would feel in a normal course could be if I'm a subsidiary of the entity or I'm somewhere related to them. But Income Tax Act also has certain provisions whereby they deem, even though you're otherwise unrelated, you can become related party. For example, Indian company needs money. It is a new company, it wants to start a power plant. What it does, it borrows from a cross-border entity provided it meets the exchange control test. There are certain conditions there. It borrows. The lender is completely unrelated party. So technically transfer pricing provisions do not apply. Even in these cases, there are deeming provision whereby the lender and the borrower can become related party. So one would need to look at it to see, because what happens if the transfer pricing provisions are applicable, then you need to ensure that the transactions happen at arm's length and there are certain compliances in terms of documentation and filing which needs to be done. And currently, the plethora of litigations are mainly in the transfer pricing field. Wherever you have a cross-border transaction and there is a related party, there is enough litigation on the transfer pricing end. And just related to transfer pricing, there is also a very interesting mechanism which is called as an advanced pricing mechanism, whereby you and me as a taxpayer can go suo motu to the authority to say, I don't want any litigation, please fix my price, and you negotiate your price, which also is gaining very popularity amongst the assessees and also the advisors. To mitigate the litigation risk, just go and settle by negotiating an advanced pricing agreement. And the most crucial point is the double taxation treaty. Now, in India, you have various types of treaties. On the indirect tax side, you have a trade treaty. On the direct tax side, you have a double taxation avoidance treaty. You have exchange of information treaty. And in certain cases, which is more of a business, it is also like a bilateral investment protection treaty. The treaty which I'm talking about mainly is dealing with double taxation avoidance. So any non-resident who is earning any income from India, you need to check the non-resident is from which country. If that non-resident is from, say, from country US, then the next step is to see whether US and India has any double taxation avoidance treaty. Now, what is the genesis of this double taxation avoidance treaty? It basically decides the taxing rights of US or India if the respective residents earn income in the respective jurisdictions. For example, if US entity is earning any income in India, under the domestic tax laws, such income will be taxed because it is sourced in India. But if India has given up its taxing right because of this negotiated tax treaty, then even though the domestic law can tax it, because of the treaty, the tax rate can become zero. So hence, it is very important to see whether there are tax treaties in place. And this was the precise reason, if you would have noticed, in the past, there are a lot of investors, whether it is a private equity investor, whether they are portfolio investor, or whether they are a strategic investor, they have invested in India from countries like Mauritius and Singapore. One of the main reasons why they chose Mauritius and Singapore, apart from various commercial reasons, was the tax treaty between India and Singapore, India and Mauritius, said that if a Mauritius seller sells shares of Indian company, you don't need to pay any tax in India. Similarly was the Singapore seller. So people wanted to ensure that there is no tax, while of course there is a huge debate. Now, are you really a Mauritius seller? Are you really a Singapore seller? It becomes a very subjective analysis. But as a policy, as a principle, the tax treaty right India had given up. Then the treaties are amended. Now there are in certain cases, in most of the cases, it is taxable except in certain relaxation. So the bottom line again here is, when you're dealing with a non-resident, whether he gets a fees, he comes to India and he does a services for your law college or for us. Now, whether that service fee should be taxed in India, whether you need to check under the source rule, answer is yes. Then go back and see whether there is any tax treaty. Yes, there is a tax treaty. Is there a service definition over there? Whether the service definition is narrowly worded so that we can say there is no tax in India is what you would need to explore. For an example, in a service fee. So depending on which situation you are, you would need to look at it. And there is also interesting new part of the treaty, which is called as Exchange of Information Treaty. Now, this is basically an effort taken by the organizations and the government to ensure that the information between the countries are exchanged smoothly and there is an administrative mechanism put in place. Now, where does this treaty help you? When you are working on matters which includes any foreign assets, whether it includes money laundering, whether it includes whether you have evaded any tax, or whether even in a genuine way you want to call off information to check what the assessee is saying is correct or not. What information can be called for, what information cannot be called for, comes from the rights of the exchange of information treaties. So, in nutshell, these are the very basic things. While income tax law is very vibrant subject, there are increasingly this is one law where you see lot of written jurisprudence by different courts. There are like daily there are case laws, and we need to always keep ourselves updated. Even if one memo we make, tomorrow the memo would need an updation, because if there is a case law which is disturbing, and there have been lot of uncertainties, and therefore the thing which we emphasized, that drafting plays an important role. Because even as a third party, when you are looking at students, you would always sometimes, as Krutika said, the myth is tax is very technical. I don't want to get into it, it's too technical. Now, as a technical subject, you need to speak to a doctor to say how the law is going to affect him. You need to speak to a person who's an engineer, who's coming and building the ceiling, for example, or who's coming and developing the metro over here, in simple terms, you need to explain them how the provisions play a role. Therefore, the drafting in lucid and business-friendly language at the same time, keeping in mind the legal provisions plays an important role in the life of a tax lawyer. Krutika, we can move on to the next slide. So, as I just took you through the main key things from an income tax, I would now request Krutika to also talk to you where these basic things are practically applied when we do as part of Khaitan and Company or even any other law firm or a tax lawyer.
Thank you. What you see on this slide is basically the whole plethora of opportunities that are available to a tax lawyer. Like Vinita and I mentioned throughout this webinar, tax presents a lot of opportunities to people with different skill sets and different areas of interest. So broadly, if you have to break down what Khaitan does as part of its tax practice, we have corporate taxation, we have tax resolution and disputes, we have personal taxation, and then we have funds, education, and the charity sector of taxation. When we come to corporate taxation, this is essentially, as the title elaborates, this is about taxation of companies and corporates. So here, basically, we will deal with a lot of mergers and acquisitions, several company restructuring, EPC contracts, advising companies on entries and exits, manners of restructuring their entities in the most tax efficient manner. It will involve a lot of research on case laws, on precedents, drafting of legal opinions, drafting of memorandums. Another sub practice area over here would be tax insurance and rep and warranty insurance matters. Now, to put it simply, these are like life insurance, but for entities that have entered into transactions and are looking to get an insurance on any tax claims that might come back. So over here, we will essentially be looking at a diligence side of an individual, look at documentation carefully, question certain acts that have been done, question certain agreements that have been made. So that's the corporate taxation aspect. Tax dispute resolution is essentially the litigation part of tax. So here, what we're looking to do is represent clients on existing matters or to advise them on potentially new matters. The skill set here that we would be looking at is, of course, a lot of research to back up your arguments, to draft legal submissions and arguments, to often brief counsel, senior counsels, and very often we argue matters ourselves as well. So to appear in courts, represent clients before various fora of the income tax authorities. So this is where, if you are looking at being a litigator, your skill set becomes important, and you can utilize your interest in the area of being before a judge and being before a court while also practicing tax. On the personal taxation aspects, here we essentially advise a lot of high net worth individuals on their succession, estate planning matters, on drafting of wills, creation of trusts. On the other hand, we're also advising a lot of companies and individuals on ESOPs, or basically employment plans which are equity related to the company. Here we're also advising people on secondments agreements, on deputations to various locations, on how those agreements need to be structured to mitigate any sort of a tax impact in India. And lastly, when we talk about funds, charitable institutions, and education, here we're advising all of these entities on how the entity should be set up. We review their documentation right from the beginning of their setup. We've advised and assisted a lot of very famous educational institutions for their entry into India. We're currently also advising a lot of charitable institutions on how their entire scheme of entities should be set up, the requirements, compliances that we have to meet. So as you can see, there are a lot of options that are available for every kind of professional within the domain of tax as well. So try and read as much as you can about it. Try and make yourself as aware as possible, and I'm sure there's something that will click to your interest. One last thing that I would like to add here is, about how tax is something that you read off knowingly or unknowingly almost every day. in your lives. One thing that we can say for sure about tax, and Vinita has emphasized on this, is that tax, that literally the only constant thing about tax is its dynamism. It's changing every now and then. Of course, we have the annual budget that brings about substantial changes to the tax law once a year. Apart from that, we often have circulars from the Central Board of Direct Taxes, that is the governing body for direct taxes in India. These circulars as well alter interpretations of several sections of the Income Tax Act. And we, of course, have our judiciary. So income tax law would probably be one area of law that the judiciary has been heavily involved in at literally every level, right from the tribunal to the High Court and right up to the Supreme Court. There are several key landmark decisions of the Supreme Court on very important tax issues that you could, just give a try reading, or at least read up maybe an article or two about them. And tax literally emanates itself in different forms in all of our everyday lives. For some of you, maybe you haven't reached the stage where you are filing income tax returns, but I'm sure you've heard your parents talk about, oh, income tax filing due date is coming. So that is one place where you know the income tax affects your life. You're also thinking or hearing your parents talking about making an investment, whether it's buying a new car, buying new shares, buying a new house, and they're always thinking, okay, let's talk to our CA, or let's talk to our tax lawyer. This again comes from the effects that the income tax law may have on your new purchase or your existing sale of assets. Another interesting example, if we have any Formula One followers here, we all know that we had the Formula One race at the circuit for 3 years, and then suddenly India was no more on the map of Formula One. So the reason for that also, to a very large extent, was tax. You can go up, read up about this, and find out a little more. Tax also plays a very important role when you're considering making a will, making a donation, or generally planning your estate as well. And of late, we've had a lot of very high-profile matters on this front. So you can again read up probably about the Singhania dispute. You could read up about the Hiranandani dispute. They're all in public domain. And these were all related to succession planning, which is also a sub-practice of Khaitan's tax area. So just to conclude, taxes in your everyday life, just be more aware, read up, question things that you don't understand, and I'm sure you will have answers available in various places or on the internet. That's it from my end, Vinita, if you have anything to add.
No, I think you have rightly summarized it. And so there are various tax practices, and also if we can take up questions now, or whether we have paucity of time, I'm not sure.
Ma'am, we can take up questions now. Thank you so much, ma'am, for enlightening us with your insight.
Sure, our pleasure. So few questions I'll just take quickly. One was, what is TCS? A very interesting thing. TCS is called as tax credited at source. What I had discussed was tax deducted at source. Now, what is TCS? To give you an example, if you go and buy a car from a showroom of Toyota, the Toyota entity would put a tax of say 1% or 0.5% on your car value, and they collect it from the buyer. It's a reverse case. It's not like a buyer collecting from the seller. It's the seller collecting when the buyer makes a payment, and they give credit to the buyer. That's called TCS. And in the recent tax budget, there were a few TCS related amendments, which was very important, especially for students also, when your parents are sending you abroad, or you go on your own for the studies, and the study cost is met from the liberalized remittance route. You can remit money for your overseas studies using the liberalized remittance route. Now, even though that is just a transaction whereby you are remitting money outside India, under the new amended law, the banker will collect X percentage, I think it's some 0.5% of the money which is going out for your educational purposes as TCS. And later on, you would get as a donor when you remit that amount. In future, when you file your tax return, you will get it back as a credit in your tax return. So essentially, it's more of a reporting mechanism whereby they do want to pay tax upfront, but at the same time, they will refund it when you file your tax return. That is on the TCS end. Then I had seen a question, what are the future progressive tax exemption? So no one can answer this question in a very precise manner because as I had said that each year the law changes, and with like last year and like I think recently last 2-3 budgets, the government's indication has been we want to roll out all the exemptions, we want to cut all the exemptions, and they have actually made the corporate tax as low as 15%, which is one of the lowest as compared to any other global country. So to look forward that they may give more exemption looks remote, but it again depends on which time you are, because now in COVID times there may be some special exclusions and exemptions which may be sought for. So this is another thing on the tax exemption which we have dealt. And I can't see. Sorry, I can't hear you. I'm not able
Ma'am,
to.
the other question is, what is the proportional possible error in the tax return and not considered tax evasion? And how much will be the fine in case of incorrect tax returns?
So again, it's a very thin line to say why you deliberately did. So like for GST, it's a self-assessment tax. A penalty is for sure, right? We are talking from income tax. Income tax, you can defend depending on the specific wordings of the provisions, whether it is automatic or you may give a reasonable ground that I have disclosed everything. I did this because I had an interpretation to take that, and you have a robust backup to say why you took that interpretation, and it was not matter of a chance that you wanted to take. Then there are, whether penalty should not apply is something which we'll need to look at it. But it's not a straightforward answer to say it will not. And what errors is basically, everything lies in how you compute your tax income. For example, small things like some deductions are not allowed. Now, there are some deductions which are allowed to you only on payment basis. You forgot that provision and you didn't add it back. It's an error. Now, there is a time limit whereby you can revise your tax return and does not invite like any kind of litigation per se, which is a suo motu revision. But if it is not, and if it is picked up by an authority, you would need to fight out your case. Or if you end up losing, then there is an interest cost attached to it, and penalty would depend on whether did you took that care or not. Again, whether that provision gave you a leeway to say that reasonable was an exclusion to say that.
So ma'am, the other question is, what does Khaitan and company look for when selecting interns for their tax practice?
Yeah, so I think Krutika, do you want to take that up?
Essentially, the first step that we look at is a CV. A well-made CV goes a long way in telling a recruiter what your interest areas are, or how you've done academically, or how you've supplemented your academics with extracurricular activities. So when I am taking an intern interview, for example, it's okay if you're not the best scorer in your college. What you need to tell me is that you're here to learn, you're here to put in your best efforts to do everything that that your seniors are asking from you, to show some basic enthusiasm. And of course it helps if you can answer questions well about things that you have put on your CV. So please make your CV very carefully when you're applying to Khaitan or literally any other place. It's no excuse for you to go for an interview and say I don't know, to something that is specifically based on your CV. So please show enthusiasm and say you are interested in doing tax, even if you haven't done any tax. So all we're looking for is people who are looking to learn and good research skills, essentially.
And to add what Krutika said, one of the things which puts me off is you may write something in your CV and you don't know about it. It's a very big negative mark. So even you need to be humble. Even if you don't know things, it's fine. But like, trying, because you get pressurized, you get stressed, and you try to do a window dressing, then you need to know that you can stand up to that questions, and you can be very humble and clear. The reason is, of course, there is an expectation when someone comes to me for an internship that how do I know there is an inclination to take tax? Like they may say, I read a lot about tax. It's a very faff answer given by students. So at least you should be able to put it across. What did you read about it? It may not be everything, but what you read, you need to be master in that. If you put something in the CV, you need to be clear about what you want to say about it. So that is also another important thing. And but yes, we always give a chance to people who are enthusiastic and who have attitude and willingness to put forward their efforts.
Thank you so much, ma'am. It was truly a delightful session. Uh, at last, I would like to request Dr. Rajat Sarma, sir, the chairperson of Youth Parliament Society, Law College, Dehradun, to give a vote of thanks.
Am I audible to me?
Yeah, it's your.
Am I audible?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Honorable Dean, Law College, Dehradun, officiating Vice Chancellor, Branch University, Professor Dr. Rajesh Krutika, sir, Honorable Principal Ma'am, Professor Dr. Poonam Rawat, distinguished speakers for today's session, Ms. Vinita, Krishnan, Direct Text at Khitan and Company, Ms. Krutika, Chitre, Senior Associate at Khitan and Company, dear participants, my dear organizers of Youth Parliament Society, Mr. Sahil Thakur, President, Ms. Tomi Sharma, Vice President, Ms. Mahima Bhatia, Event Coordinator, and Mr. Abhijit Kashyap, Event Coordinator, and all other office bearers of Youth Parliament Society, Law College, Dehradun. On the successful completion of the second day of this national webinar on career awareness in legal globe, I take this privilege to propose vote of thanks to one and all here, starting with Professor Dr. Rajesh Krutika, sir. I am grateful to Honorable Dean, sir, for providing us all the support, for his guidance, and for sharing his valuable time with us. We are grateful to you, sir. We are also grateful to Honorable Principal Ma'am, Professor Dr. Poonam Rawat Ma'am, for sharing her valuable time with us, for providing us motivation, guidance, and support throughout this event. Thank you very much, ma'am. I place on record my sincere thanks to both our distinguished speakers from Khitan and Company, Ms. Vinita Krishnan and Ms. Krutika Chitre. We are very grateful to both of you, ma'am. Taxation law is said to be one of the complex subjects. We all know it. And as you said, this subject is one of the most dynamic subject which keeps on changing every year. Every student of law, every practitioner of this particular law needs to understand, needs to go through the latest amendments. So he needs to be keep abreast with the latest changes if he wants to be successful in this particular profession. So this was a very nice presentation, starting from the basic aspects or attributes which every lawyer must have. They may include drafting, presentation skills, your argumentation, your exploration. That includes your exposure, your participation in internship programs. Starting from these basic features which every lawyer must have, it was great covering different aspects. I know that within this short span of time, we cannot go into the details of complex issues of taxation law, but although it was very nice and comprehensive, and we would definitely want to hear something more from you in future, because most of our aspirants want to hear many things. They want to know, they want to get acquainted with many complex issues of taxation law. So we would like you to, we would like to hear from you in future as well. Thank you very much, ma'am. We are grateful to you. On behalf of Youth Parliament Society, Law College Dehradun, I express my deepest gratitude to both of you. Thank you very much. I'll fail in my duty if I would not place my sincere thanks to all the participants, plus the plus the organizers of this event, including all the team of Youth Parliament Society. They also deserve accolades. So congratulations to all the organizers of this event. Thank you very much. Have a nice time.
Thank you so much. We are really humbled by such kind words, and we'll really look forward to more opportunities with you guys. And also, I would like to especially thank Abhijit, because I really liked his enthusiasm and initiative. He had reached out to me via LinkedIn for placing an internship. Despite the COVID times, he was enthusiastic to take an effort, and thereafter he tried connected again. So that is again something which is and also it was good interacting with Mahi and Somi, good lead you took. We are very happy to be part of this.
Thank you so much, ma'am, for joining us.
Bye, everyone. Stay safe.
Thank you.
Bye.